Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today's webinar is Admissions and Occupancy, Day 4. Today is June 6th, and our instructor is going to be Cheryl A. Cosley. Today's webinar is being recorded. My name is Alyssa Atkins, and I am the Training and Development Coordinator for the Native Learning Center. And today I will be your webinar facilitator. Just a quick disclaimer before we get started, this webinar provides a summary of fundamental concepts, requirements, and/or procedures within the allotted 90 minutes. The material discussed does not illustrate all possible scenarios that could be applicable. Also displayed here is our copyright infringement law. This is just a friendly reminder that the webinar presentation materials are protected by copyright, trademark, trade secret, and other intellectual property laws. Now I'm going to show you how you can communicate in today's webinar. If you look at the very top of your screen, you will see a hand. With that hand, you can raise hand, agree, disagree, applaud, laugh, or step away. Now your screen should look similar to the graphic here. To the bottom left, you will see a pod that says Files. Here you will find any handouts or appendix items included in today's presentation. Please feel free to download a copy for yourself. Just hover over the item you would like to download with your mouse, then click the arrow pointing downwards to download and save onto your device. Once the item is downloaded, it should appear in your device's download section. The second pod to the right, labeled Web Links, is where you will find our survey about today's webinar, along with the link to receive our weekly newsletter. Connect with the Native Learning Center on LinkedIn and any other links that will be seen throughout today's presentation. Finally, to the right of the screen, we have a chat pod available. This is how you will communicate with instructor and NLC staff. If you have any questions during the presentation, we welcome you to send them in by using the chat box. Simply type your message in the space that says type here and hit enter or click that up arrow icon button to submit. We do encourage class participation, so please feel free to write in those questions or comments. Tech support issues should also be submitted here and know that most can be solved by leaving and rejoining the meeting room. Let's all get the chat box going together by now typing in your name, where you're joining us from, your tribal affiliation, and your work or role in Indian country. It is now with the pleasure that I introduce Cheryl A. Cosley.
Thank you very much, my girl. So welcome back to day 4. I was gonna make an announcement, but I don't know if I should wait a second or not. Welcome and good afternoon. I went and did go and smudge and pray and have done all of that because that's the way we usually start our trainings and meetings. And this presentation is courtesy of the Native Learning Center. We had lots of questions yesterday. I hope you got something out of there. With the home program. So getting to know the instructor. My name is Cheryl Cosley. My Anishinaabe name is Redbird Woman. I am Loon Clan. I come from Place of the Pike, Bay Mills Indian Reservation. We're located at the top of Michigan. Our waters actually border Canada, and we are Ojibwe Chippewa people. I served as Director of Housing for my tribe for over 28 years. During that time, I also worked with the National American Indian Housing Council. 12 years, started as a secretary, went to the vice chair, and then became chairwoman for 2 terms. That's the maximum length of you're allowed. So I also served as the chairwoman of the Great Lakes Indian Housing Association. That's the 31 tribes that surround the Great Lakes. And I served as their chairwoman for 7 years. I've been providing training and technical assistance for 5 years. I feel very, very blessed that I continue to get to help our Native people. That's always been my goal. So again, our course objectives, we're going to be learning about verification and requirements and collections. And this is the 4th day of 5. We do have, as you knew yesterday, lots of exercises, participant materials, examples. And again, please pull down some of these reference materials. Right now, reference item number 5 PIH 202407 is the newest guidance that's available. Yesterday, Mr. Jake Ortiz did point out that on my slide 23, because now there is quite an adjustment to net assets. It went from 5,000 to 50,000. They've made quite a few adjustments, and all of the materials aren't out on it. And I made a mistake on my slide, and on slide 23, what to include as an asset, I listed IRA as the fifth item. It's been corrected. It's been corrected on the slides if you download them now. Because now excluded from the calculation of any net assets are the value of any account under a retirement plan recognized as such by the Internal Revenue Service, including individual retirement arrangements, IRAs, employer retirement plans for self-employed individuals. So I do apologize for that mistake. It's been corrected. If you need to re-download it, the corrected version's on there. That's the only difference basically on that slide. So thank you, Jay, for pointing that out. So we are going to be doing calculating adjusted income, calculating assistance for non-low income. That's what we did yesterday. Today, we're going to get into verification, waiting list management, tenant and home buyer selection, and conflict of interest in admissions. So our module today to start out with is verification. So before the selection process can occur, your admissions and occupancy staff should interview your applicant's family if you can, obtain current information about the family's circumstances to prepare for that verification process. At your interview, you should confirm and update all information provided on that application, explain your program requirements, your verification process, and penalties for providing false information. Obtain the current family income, household composition, information, other data need to certify eligibility, and compute the applicant's rent or homebuyer payment. So in accordance with 24 CFR Part 1128, so now that you guys know how to go search those materials, that's where you're going to look. Housing staff must verify that a family is income eligible based on the family's anticipated annual income. Verifications must be kept in the residence file as it will be reviewed during your compliance monitoring, okay? All information related to eligibility at the time of admission must be kept in your current participant folder. So if they're there 20 years, and I had some there that long in the rentals, and their file gets really big and really thick, you can give them a new file, but that particular information has got to go over to your current file, okay? If it kind of flagged your conflict of interest stuff and you had to do a posting regarding that applicant, I would keep that in there with that also. Okay. Recipients are required to verify information relating to eligibility, asset, income, deductions from income, admission preferences, compliance with applicant selection criteria. Exhibit 8.1 actually provides examples of typical items that need to be verified for housing assistance programs. Because recipients have flexibility in designing programs, there may be program-specific items that need to be verified. And some mentioned within the exhibit may not be applicable. Whatever your situation is, each program must be governed by policies and procedures applicable to that particular assistance. That's why I said it's really, really good to have, you can have your overall A and O policy, but you should have, your subchapters basically. This is what governs the slow rent program. This is what governs the home buyer program. This is what governs the rehab program or emergency modernization or down payment assistance. They all have their own rules, and it's sometimes confusing when you try to put them all in one document. So these are examples. Eligibility for admission, such as proof of tribal affiliation, income assets and asset income, family composition, social security numbers, recipient preferences, if any, such as tribal member preference, displacement by natural disaster, governmental action, domestic violence, income targeting, income tiers, broad range of income goals, preference for workers or those attending school. It's up to your tribe to set their own preferences and priorities. Okay, those are some of them. Veteran or service person status, living, working, or being hired to work within the recipient's community. Some people put that as their preferences. Preference for workers or those, like I said, attending school. Deductions such as family members other than the head or spouse under the age of 18, age or disability of the family head or spouse, disability of family members other than the head or spouse, full-time status of family members other than the head or spouse, childcare costs, disability assistance expenses, working families only, unreimbursed medical cost, elderly and disabled families only, recipient standards for applicant selection criteria, such as a documented ability to abide by that lease and your contract requirements, landlord references, credit checks, utility histories, previous histories of tenancy, rent paying, caring for a home, home visits, criminal history of all adult household members if your program requires that. Your other program requirements, if they're applicable, if you offer emergency housing, congregate housing, special needs housing, housing rehab, down payment assistance. So those can all be part of it. Social security numbers. One of the most important tools for identification is an applicant or a participant's social security number. Prior to admission, each family member who has a social security number, who is at least 6 years of age, is required to disclose and verify that social security number. Children on whose behalf welfare payments are paid have social security numbers. The best verification of the social security number is that original social security card. If it's not available, you can accept letters from the Social Security office that establish and state that number. Some driver's license, passports, other documents, neither one that I have my social security number on there. But if the particular state that you're working in does, you could use that item. The documents used to verify social security numbers should be copied and placed in the applicant's file. If applicants state they don't have a social security number, you should ask them if they have ever worked in the United States, had a bank account, received any government benefits, or attended school in the States. If they respond negatively to these questions and continue to state that they do not have a social security number, they're required to sign a certification to that effect. You may not require any individual who does not have a social security number to obtain a card. Most methods of verification require a social security number, so the recipient should be familiar with how an applicant can obtain a social security number locally. If your applicant states that they do have a social security number, but cannot readily verify that number, that family can't be assisted until that verification is provided. Applicants who have social security numbers but refuse to provide them are not eligible for housing assistance. If a member of a tenant family indicates they have a social security number but cannot readily verify it, he or she shall be asked to certify to this fact, and you can give them 60 days to provide that verification. If the individual is 62 years of age or older, you can give them up to 120 days. That would be at you as the recipient's discretion. So if your tenants need an updated Social Security benefit statement, they can go online using this link on here to request that a copy be sent to their home. So possible third-party verification sources can be obtained from, but it's not limited to, your credit bureau, your Internal Revenue Services for income verification, federal matching programs for Social Security, income, public assistance, social services, TANF for income. There are various employers, financial institutions, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, credit and trust income, certification of Indian blood, educational institutions, employment verification, GA benefit verification, child support verification, and VA benefit verification. Your overview, your verifications cut across all of your occupancy areas. All the information in a tenant file needs to be verified and properly documented. You as a recipient need to establish verification standards and procedures within your A&O policy. Documentation and verification is a joint responsibility of you as a recipient and that family. Obtaining information for verification purposes requires a signed consent for release of information from the family member whose information is being requested. So, what additional documents are needed? What additional information must that applicant provide? What must be verified to comply with your NAHASDA requirements? And what type of verification is needed? You need to make a checklist. As you get better at doing that, the more often you do it, there might be additional items that you add to that list. You need to verify income, assets, asset income exclusions, okay? Allowances, deductions, family composition, social security numbers, tribal IDs. Verifying income exclusions, you need to obtain verification for an income exclusion. If without that verification, you as a recipient would not be able to determine whether the income is to be excluded. So, for example, payments received under Title V of the Older Americans Act of 1985. The wages of a child under 18 would be the same situation. You need to verify that participant's age. Verify the age. Verification of that amount is not necessary for those wages. You just need to verify to see if they are eligible for that exclusion. So, no income or not enough income. Careful assessment is required when an applicant states that they have no income or the stated income is not enough to cover household expenses. It's important to note that the household expenses, if they're paid and if they're current, or if they remain unpaid. This is a clear indicator of whether there's truly no or not enough income. Third-party verification should be required, including verification of Social Security benefits, a printout of the record, verification of unemployment benefits, notarized statements of non-filing for federal income tax, verification of assets on deposit, a review of a checking account statement that may show frequent deposits that may mean income. So you're gonna come across at some point zero income families. A family budget or a statement of financial responsibility should be required. Use upfront verification, for example, that RS 4506T or a credit report. Recipients must attempt to determine the source of income when the family's regular expenditures conflict with their claim of zero income. This is the 4056T. It's a request for transcripts of a tax return. And you should have some form of a zero income. You can get them from public housing also. They might have more information on them than this particular, it's got cigarettes on there, entertainment, telephone, cable. Right now you might want, streaming services. You might update that, different things like that. Do they have pets? How do they feed the pets? Declaration of no income. Issue: husband, wife, and 2 children apply for assistance. The wife is not on any tax returns, no verifiable income, or other sort of paper trail to use as documentation. What alternative documentation is required to prove she is without any income to contribute? Okay. Recommendation is both adults should sign a third-party release of information form before proceeding to verify that applicant's zero income claim. Request several of the following: that IRS Form 4506T to verify either income or non-filing for federal income tax, verification of Social Security benefits, printout of the record, verification of unemployment benefits, verification of assets on deposit, same bank as spouse, credit report. If she's tribal, if your tribal has assistance programs, you can call to see if she's a recipient of those or find out. There's different things you can do. Standard verification forms: consent to release of information, verification of employment, income, trust income, savings, pensions, landlord verification. So your form should capture the name, the position, the telephone number, and the email of the person that provided you this information. It should capture current and anticipated earnings and fluctuating pay rates and hours. Okay. My husband was a commercial fisherman for years, didn't pay taxes. Okay. He was one of those. So he got to be a certain age after 30 years. It's like, okay, you need to start getting Social Security again. You need to start paying that. So he started truck driving for a local construction company here. I would have asked them how often they get overtime. The only time that they do not receive overtime from May on is the first week of work when they're getting their trucks ready. Uh, he averages anywhere between 40 and 70 hours a week. Well, 50 and 70 actually. So that is something that I now know if I was checking on truck driving or construction workers in the summer to ask that question. What is the average amount of overtime? Okay. May want to consider including self-addressed stamped envelopes with each verification form mailed out. Sample certification forms: employment, credit, trust income, financial institution, banking, VA, 401k, etc. On that release for information. So that authorized release of information, the privacy statement, the form from HUD. Okay. All adult family members and spouse must sign. You got to keep an eye on when the children within the home are turning 18. Maybe put that on your calendar. I was a big user of a 5-year calendar for certain filing, for when things are due. Can be used between regular re-exams to verify unreported income. Applicant certification that income and other information is accurate and complete. But the thing, that I was this many years old before I learned this, that form is only valid for 15 months from the date of signature. I was probably 5-6 years in at least when I realized that. If it wasn't, might have been later. I didn't, it should have hit me that it has an expiration on it. So you should be, every time they come in to recertify, have them sign another form. You also need to have somewhere on there or a separate document that you allow, or they allow actually, copies with their signature. And they don't need to be original signatures. Either that or you make them sign multiple forms. Because some people won't accept a copy unless they can, it's proven that they allow that. So your third party written verification and documentation. This is another thing when I was young and dumb and didn't know. I always assumed first party would be better than third party. Not so. Third party's best, second, and then first. Third party written verification. To the maximum extent feasible, recipients should utilize third party verification sources. IRS 4506T is very helpful. Independent directly from a third party by email, fax, or other reliable means. Must not be hand carried by the family. And this comes over from public housing. They do not want a chance for these or that information to be altered or, not all of it come to you. So, like I said, if you're on working with a tribe and your tribe is a big employer, human resources is huge for that. Third-party oral verification and documentation. Use where third-party written is impossible to obtain or not timely, and then follow up with written. Phone or interview by recipient staff. Recipient records, information, date and time of contact, name and source of the information, the recipient staff, your name and signature, who got this information with a signature on it, and the summary of the information you received and rationale you have for using oral verification. Well, they wouldn't, it was a trucking company and they were all men. There was nobody there that would give me this information. I needed to phone call the boss and get it, verification and documentation. So your documentation that is more than 90 days old should be considered not timely, and you need to obtain new documentation, okay? When it comes time to put somebody into a house, over 30 days can be too long. You need to verify all that income verification, that income, and make sure right before, because they have to be income eligible at the time you put them in there. 30 days is what I used for that. At the point where you're putting them in a house, right before that. It's not applicable to everything. Your birth certificates, your social security numbers, that's a one and done. Once you get it, you have it. Establish timeframes for receipt of third-party verifications. 2 weeks and a follow-up. 4 weeks, 21 days and a follow-up. And you must document in the file why, again, you used that third-party or why that third-party verification was not available or used. So your second party is basically the same thing, except for the information that doesn't require certification, birth certificate, social security. The third party is impossible or delayed if their income is derived from cash transactions. The need to document lack of income. So you're supposed to put a memo to the file documenting when third-party verification is not available. They consider second-party verifications, check stubs, copies of tax returns, and copies of Social Security award letters. Now, this is me, but I think and fully found that good enough, okay? As long as I had all of the check stubs. First party, same thing. You should include that memo to the file, why you didn't use the third party. And it's basically a rinse and repeat of two, okay? So the recipient, you are the final judge of what constitutes adequate, credible verification and documentation. If there is a doubt about reliability of that information, you should get out and get more information. Recipient should have reasonable confidence that that documentation is accurate. You are not required to accept information simply because it's offered. So you can also use applicant self-certification. You, again, need to make that memo to the file, why you didn't use third party. It's perhaps income derived from those cash transactions. Or in our case up here, it's a fisherman who isn't required because it's a treaty related income to file income tax. So that put us in, like I said, I think it was day 2. I said, I come on now, you'd be working at McDonald's if that's all you were making. I would sometimes have to argue with them and say, no, I'm not going to buy that. You made more than that. So I don't know how to say this. Enter the world of dispensaries. Okay. I know that some of our people on some of our reservations, because I've seen it firsthand, are fighting with that. Because of the fact that it's the regulation, especially when the dispensary itself is located on the reservation. They're not reporting that income, yet you can see the type of car that they're driving and things like that. You could walk into the shop and see them behind the counter. So you involve your legal at your within the tribe, okay, and seek help that way, because there's always, or you use the self certifications, and that's what you have that conversation. I can see what you drive. I see where you work. We have income here. You have to claim some of it. Verification forms should be comprehensive but not complicated. They should ask secondary questions. Are your expenses reimbursed? Should include a false statement warning. Okay, those are very necessary within your application packets, within, your verification packets. As I said, if you're doing this, you should have a fraud statement behind you on the wall, perhaps blown up. Must include a signed authorization for that release of information. Should capture name, position, telephone number, email of whoever you get information from. Should capture current and anticipated earnings, fluctuating pay rates, and hours. May want to consider including self-addressed stamped envelopes. One of the things that I had was a pad of paper with a cover on it, and I would document any time that I talked to a tenant. And it might be just a small scribbling, on June 6th at 2:33 p.m., I talked to John Henry about postponing his inspection. I told him that we could do it once, but it had to be done and completed by the end of August. Make a note like that. And then you get them call back and say, well, I called and talked to her and this is what she told me. And you say, no, you pull to that date and you say, you talked to me. This is what you asked. This is what I told you. And they won't do it again. They're like, wow, she's got notes, and then they'll start trying to do it with your other staff. Get them in the habit of that. You get in the habit of that. That will save you a lot of time and a lot of gray hair over the years, but a tenant conversation booklet, it's worth its weight in gold sometimes. Take that 2 minutes to document it, so a release form. Obtaining information for verification purposes requires a signed consent for release of information from the family member whose information is being requested. Tenant consent. Recipient is always required to obtain the signature of all family members 18 years of age and older on a consent form authorizing the release of information. Recipients should review their consent forms to ensure that various methods to verify income are included. On that HUD form, you're supposed to list everybody you're going to seek information from. Okay. Ask applicants to sign multiple copies of each verification form, or a clause can be included in your verification form in which the applicant provides permission that allows for the use of copies of the form. That's what I was getting at earlier. I couldn't remember if I made a slide about that or not. Okay, because you've got to cover all angles. So your A&O policy should also talk about a provision for a refusal to sign. It should also go into a provision for failure to recertify, failure to allow inspection of your units. Okay. If the applicant or tenant or any adult member of the applicant or tenant's family does not sign and submit to the consent form or verification forms as required, assistance will be denied. Or if you fail to allow the inspection in a timely manner as scheduled, or recertify in a timely manner or as scheduled, you will be evicted. Make sure it's in your A&O policy. So again, your verification, you have to verify your deductions, such as family members under the age of 18, age or disability of the head or the spouse or the sole occupant, disability of any other family member, full-time student status, childcare cost, disability assistance expenses, unreimbursed expenses, and I would put your travel, okay? Travel cost, if getting a travel allowance. So verifying that annual income, you need a thorough understanding of what constitutes income. You should never make assumptions about whether somebody may or may not have a particular type of income. And you need to obtain verification for an income exclusion if without that verification, a recipient would not be able to determine whether the income is to be excluded. So, I would contact Bernadette, your HUD office, and ask them what is legally allowable, okay, about disabilities, because it's a very sensitive area. For allowances and deductions, you must also consider all anticipated deductions from annual income to obtain accurate adjusted annual income. You in this field are more aware of how much a family makes. And if you've been there long enough, you can almost look at a family after a while and it'll be in the back of your head, okay, they make about, $46,000, everybody there. I always asked my staff, and I had one that said, hey, this isn't my job. And the chairman and I both disagreed with her and said, yes, it is. The more people that you can qualify for different programs, the more chances that they'll have a better life and we'll collect our rent. So we would have applications for different assistance programs, your low income heating assistance, the commodity program, different, the GA programs, different things like that, because we would know the thresholds and we would say, hey, I think you make enough money where you would, or you have income sufficient to qualify for this program. And we would have the application forms there. Qualify them or get them as much help as you possibly can. How much income is in a house better than almost anybody within the tribe. So help your members that way. Okay, so time for a question, lady in the background, my assistant. who must sign release forms for verification. Had a household and spouse, all household members over the age of 18, all household members. Couple more, you guys. Got a lot more people listed in class and are answering my questions, and this doesn't take any math. No. Okay, I am going to get ready to close the poll in a second or so, just because I don't want us late again. And the poll, and all household members over the age of 18. Which of the following should be verified? Income, deductions, exclusions, all of the above, none of the above. This is an easy one, guys. Come on. Couple more, you guys. Come on. You guys aren't all answering. You're supposed to be doing something. Are you doing something in the background? All of the above is correct. True or false, as long as the applicant was eligible when they applied, they can be admitted without additional verification. Anybody else? Gonna end it. Okay. That is false. They must be eligible at the time of admission. I couldn't get to my arrow. How should the recipient resolve the discrepancies between third-party verifications and documents? Always use third-party verification. Always use information from pay stubs. Use the method that benefits the family. Contact the source of the third-party verification. Jay Cortez, you you gotta have me rewriting my whole course. What slide with the 18 on there? Okay. Would you find that for me, Jay? Oh, you can't go backwards either, can you? Okay. And the poll. Yes, and it's contact the source of third-party verification. Alista, where you're putting this, I can't click my button to right there to move my slide. Okay, module 10, waiting list management. See, those are all baby loons, by the way. I'm Loon Clan. Oh, you'll see 50 of them go by. And then they'll come back 15, 20 minutes later, and there'll be 10 less, and the fish will come right out of the water and grab them. But That's the equivalent of my ducks in a row. No. Okay, so your waiting list management. The purpose is to establish the order of assistance to qualified applicants, implements preferences and priorities, ensures fair and equitable treatment, serves as source of data about need, demand for unit size, and location. I can get it, Jay. Thank you so much. I can't even see the page number, the one that I'm looking at here. So that's why I had to ask what page I was on yesterday. The waiting list organization, once an applicant is determined to appear eligible to receive housing assistance pursuant to your policies, the applicant's name is placed on a waiting list. Thank you, Lindell. The waiting list is the mechanism used to implement your preference system and establish the order in which housing assistance is offered to your qualified applicants. Policies should include the following topics: essential application information required for waiting list placement, preferences and priorities within those preferences, opening and closing waiting list as applicable if you do that, waiting list organization by location, bedroom, program size, or type, entering new applicants, updating, removal from the waiting list, making and rejecting offers, and reporting. So just in case I don't hit on this, you should have within your policy how many times that you will allow somebody to reject your offer of housing, okay? They can't just float at the top until they're ready to go into a place or they get the house that they finally want. Most places have at least two that you can reject it twice, and then you're placed at the bottom of the waiting list. You usually don't remove them from the waiting list unless they ask you. You place them at the bottom, okay? But you don't let them just float there. That's not fair to everyone else. So your waiting list organization, setting up, maintaining that waiting list properly is essential to carrying out admissions in accordance with your program regulations and local policies. A well-organized waiting list is a source of data about need and demand for units by size, type, location. The waiting list may be closed if the number of applications greatly exceeds your available units. So your preferences, your admission policies may include preferences, which do not guarantee admission, but rather establish the order of placement on your waiting list. Assigning preferences to applicants who meet certain criteria is a method intended to provide housing opportunities to applicants based upon household circumstances. Applicants with preferences are selected from the waiting list and receive an opportunity for an available unit earlier than those who do not have a preference. Preferences affect only the order of applicants on the waiting list. They do not make anyone eligible who was not otherwise eligible, and they do not change your owner's right to adopt and enforce tenant screening criteria. Recipient policies identify available preferences and give all applicants an opportunity to show that they qualify for available preferences. The preference specifically identified under NAHASDA allows recipients to give preference to tribal members first in providing housing assistance, okay? That's contained, I believe, within the statute. But yes, you definitely put within your housing ANO policy that we will house all Bay Mills members first and any other Native after they have been served, or however the language you put in there. So examples of waiting list preference: income targeting, admission of certain percentage of families within certain income ranges, residency, tribal affiliation, employment, credit worthiness, or mortgage readiness. Thank you, Jay. Elderly or displaced single person, persons of disability, first-time homebuyers. So your preferences and priorities. So you should be looking at your policies. Your governing body should be looking at your policies almost yearly, but definitely once every 3 years. I've been to places where they haven't been touched in 15 and 20 years. They're way out of compliance for one thing. But look at your preferences and priorities. I know I said that before, but you don't have to use the ones that were in the language for the 37 Act years and years ago, okay? So preferences affect the order of selection for tribal members. Priorities are program-specific criteria and are usually point-based. So your admission policies can or may also identify priorities within program preferences to ensure consistency with specific program requirements or to correct any inequities, such as families who have never been assisted versus those who have previously been assisted. So some of the examples of preferences and priorities: preferences, head of households or enrolled tribal members. Tribal member, head of household with federally recognized co-head. Head of household and children who are members of a federally recognized tribe. Priorities: income targeting, credit worthiness, elderly, disabled family, veterans. So updating your waiting list. It's a good practice to update waiting list annually by contacting applicants to confirm the information on their applications is still accurate, to reaffirm that they are still interested in the housing assistance for which they applied. If staff determines that the applicant is no longer eligible, or if the applicant requests to be removed, the staff should document this and remove the applicant from the waiting list. Waiting lists can be maintained manually or in an automated system. The primary advantages of that automation are the quick manipulation of large amounts of data and greater objectivity. However, the data is only as good as the staff imputing that data, inputting. So if you remove somebody from a waiting list, put the application in an inactive file, you never get rid of it, okay? Have the staff sign, date, and note the reason for removal, okay? HUD will look at that during their monitoring. Every time somebody is moved from a list, they're going to look at, did they ask for it? Did you do it? Did you document when you did it? Who did it? On that file, okay? So be careful about that one. One of the better ways is to put in your A&O policy and on the application that this application is good for 1 year from the date of application. And then you find another mechanism if they want to just come in and update it, or are you going to make them redo the whole application, or do you have an update form you can put on there with a new date? And then you also have to decide, are you going to let your tribal members know in the 11th month that they have one more month to come in? But if you do that with everybody, that consistency bit. So that's almost better than just to have a waiting list that goes on and on and on forever with no expiration date on it and no requirement for new information. That's up to you how you do that. There is a lot of places that the application is good for 1 year, and then they're required to come in. Now it's up to you, but you have to be consistent if you're going to notify them and give them a little jiggler, Okay, time for an exercise. Waiting lists are required under NAHASDA. True or false? Okay, close it up. The answer is true. Okay. Purpose of the waiting list is to establish service order based on all preferences and factors. True or false? Anybody else going to answer me? Answer is true. Oh, I thought there would be more. Tenant and homebuyer selection. So your selection process, your applicant completes a preliminary application to be determined eligible, placed on a waiting list. Applications updated annually. When the unit is available, it's always a good idea to select the top 2 applicants just in case the first one doesn't want it. Then you don't have to go through whatever process you go through. Ask your first applicant to come in to be interviewed to see if they want the unit or not. And if not, you offer it to your second family. You go through that again too. You verify the applicant information, make sure all that income, make sure they're still income eligible. After the verification, eligibility is confirmed, you offer the offer is extended and the unit is assigned. Okay. Couple of little things. Don't let people move in before that unit is ready. Don't let them put anything in there. You've opened Pandora's box. You've set a precedence when you do that. You have to do it for everybody else. You're going to have people say, you don't have to clean the house and get the house ready. We need it right now. No, you bring your units to that certain condition that you expect to receive them back as. Okay. We give a painted, cleaned unit. Everything was clean. That's how I expect to get it back. That's how you're going to get it. You have those conversations with them somewhat after this stage before you hand them the keys. Okay. So it's almost like a 3-time process. You extend it, you verify everything. Then you go and you talk to them and you say, we have to have conversations. You and your, spouse or all adults should need to come in here, and you run through the lease with them. That's when you tell them, you have those conversations with them. If you have any big changes in income, if you lose a job, if you gain a job, if you add another member of your family, should you get divorced, should you lose a member of your family, life altering, basically, you tell them, I'm not allowed to charge you over 30% of your income. You have to come in. It's imperative to come in and see us within a week of one of these events happening. And that's when you give them that talk, and you tell them that they're responsible for the conduct of their guest, and they can be evicted because of their grandson or because of their son's buddy. That's when you have those conversations with them. If you wait until you're getting ready to hand them the keys, they're thinking, I got to buy a garbage can. I need a shower curtain for that bathroom. Everything except what you're going through with probably the most important time you have to tell them about the relationship that you're starting with them, with that family. That's the part you can't, that conversation. And I used to have that for, the first probably 15 years. I was the one that met with all of my tenants, and had that conversation. So they knew what I expected of them also, and what they should expect of me, or us, so your process, they complete that application to be determined eligible and placed on that waiting list. Okay. Then you go out through all those steps and give them the unit, or, have that process that I just talked about while they're getting the unit ready. So your NAHASDA tenant and homebuyer selection plan, this would be the statute, because it says section 207B of NAHASDA. Remember, I told you the statute's the first place you go to gain information, first place for the rules. They didn't put it in the regs unless the statute wasn't clear or didn't address it. So that's always where you start first, which a lot of people never look at. So section 207B of NAHASDA describes the tenant selection criteria for housing assistance provided with Indian Housing Block Grant funds. Tenant and homebuyer selection, the owner or manager of affordable rental housing assisted with grant amounts provided under this act shall adopt and utilize written tenant and homebuyer selection policies and criteria that are consistent with the purpose of providing housing for low-income families, are reasonably related to program eligibility and the ability of the applicant to perform the obligations of the lease, and provide for selection of tenants and homebuyers from a written waiting list in accordance with the policies and goals set forth in the Indian Housing Plan for the tribe that is the grant beneficiary of such grant amounts, and prompt notification in writing to any rejected applicant of that rejection and the grounds for that rejection. So you need to look at your A&O policy and see if it does that, and define prompt. When you are defining days, you need to say calendar days or business days. I would recommend, for the definition of prompt, I don't recommend, this is what I used, 10 business days, okay? That will get you through the Thanksgiving to Christmas breaks in that area. Should you be doing it right during that time, okay? You don't want your staff to be gone for a week, week and a half, and not be notifying somebody that they ran a criminal lien on or whatever. Your tenant selection plan, recipients must develop and make public written tenant selection policies and procedures that include descriptions of the income and other eligibility requirements that must be met for admission. Your required topics, income eligibility requirements, Indian preference requirements, other preferences and priorities, definition of family, project-specific eligibility requirements, social security number requirements, income limits. So your required topics, procedures for accepting applications and selecting from the waiting list, procedures for accepting applications and pre-applications, procedures for applying preferences, including income targeting, applicant screening criteria, drug-related or criminal activity criteria, other allowable screening criteria, procedures for rejecting ineligible applicants, occupancy standards, unit transfer policies, including selection of in-place residents versus applicants from the waiting list when vacancies occur. You need to have a policy about transfers. When you're going to do the in-house transfers, if they're allowed to have any damage to their home over wear and tear, and if they have to pay for that before you transfer them, you have to deal with that in your A&O policy. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act requiring requirements and the Indian civil rights laws and statutes. Policy for opening and closing your waiting list of a property list for your property or program. applicant notification and opportunity to supplement information already provided. Procedures for identifying applicants' needs for the features of accessible units or reasonable accommodation. Policy for notifying applicants and potential applicants of changes in the tenant selection plan. So general selection criteria should be established by your admission policies. Some of the examples: the ability to make monthly payments, comments from prior landlords, credit references, housekeeping habits, criminal background checks, disability accommodations. Selection criteria for tenants and homebuyers are established by policy. Examples of permissible criteria are demonstrated ability to make monthly rental or homebuyer payments on time and be a good customer or neighbor, comments from current and prior landlords, housekeeping habits, criminal background checks, units which are handicapped accessible, reasonable accommodation to disabled applicants, consideration of any extenuating circumstance, and the use and necessity of assistance animals. There is criteria which is prohibited. Physical examinations. Now, I don't know if somebody tried to do this in public housing. I can't imagine that they did this within our tribes. Physical examinations or medical testing may not be required as a condition of admission. Pregnant applicants may not be required to undergo medical testing to determine a child's sex for assigning a bedroom size. An applicant may be uniformly required to furnish evidence of an ability to meet obligations of tenancy, but greater burdens may not be imposed on individuals with handicaps. Persons with handicaps may meet requirements of occupancy with the assistance of others, such as an attendant care provider. Disability status. Except for units specifically designed for individuals with disabilities, where an applicant requests such a unit or preference, it is unlawful to make an inquiry to determine whether an applicant for a dwelling unit, a person intending to reside in that dwelling unit after it is rented or made available, or any person associated with that person has a disability, or to make an inquiry as to the nature or severity of the disability of such person. That's why I said you need to contact your HUD official, okay? I don't know what laws have changed in the last 5 years. I do know that we met with fair housing within the Great Lakes. That was a great subject because I had somebody who wanted to put an assistance cat into my apartments that did not allow pets, okay, as an assistance animal. And it is a very, very fine line that you walk. So that is a good subject with your HUD people. We had it at the national level. It's just a very, very hard subject to work with sometimes. I do know that I have seen applications that they now put, do you require any special accommodations on the application? Okay. So I couldn't answer your question very much better than that earlier. So your overview of the selection process: the expected steps in the selection process are as follows. An applicant must complete a preliminary application which provides sufficient information to determine eligibility to receive housing assistance in order to be placed on the waiting list. When an appropriate unit becomes available, the top applicant on the waiting list is notified of pre-selection and asked to come in for an interview to collect current information. During the verification process, the staff will determine if the applicant still meets the qualifications for the specific program. Once the verification is completed, eligibility is confirmed, an offer of housing assistance is extended, and if it is accepted, a unit is assigned. Many systems for selecting participants have been developed to ensure fairness, prevent conflict of interest issues from occurring. The methodology chosen by the recipient must be established by written policy. Some of the selection methods include, but are not limited to, lottery, first come, first serve, and points system. So terms and conditions, once determination is made, housing staff provide written notice with description of the determination, the time frame for the receipt of response from the family, and a description of the hearing appeals process. Your selection criteria will be different for the different programs that you offer. Month-to-month agreement, 2-year stable employment would obviously be home buyer. Credit worthiness, usually home buyer. Exclusive option to purchase would definitely be a home buyer program. Purchase price, home buyer. No income, poor credit, probably rental. Okay. Your eligibility criteria for lease purchase. Okay, this is a sample from someone's policy. All applicants must be able to pay the minimum rent and achieve mortgage readiness according to their client action plan, not to exceed, I believe it's 2 years they used. Be committed to purchasing the property. Have sufficient income required to meet the minimum rent and other financial obligations of maintaining and buying a home. Be able to overcome the obstacles to mortgage readiness in a period of time not to exceed however many years, except in extreme circumstances. Be committed to schedule the time to participate in the required group counseling and the one-on-one counseling tailored to the individual family needs. So what is HUD going to check? If the participant is non-low income, is the participant paying the appropriate rate up to fair market value? Okay, exercise time. Who is selected when using a waiting list? The first eligible person on the waiting list, the top 20 are put in a hat for a drawing, or the chairperson. Couple more. Come on. Okay, we're going to end the poll. The first eligible person on the waiting list. Your tenant homebuyer selection needs to be governed by law. True or false? Couple more. Getting ready to end it. Okay. It is governed by law, the NAHASDA statute. Okay. Your tenant homebuyer selection needs to be in writing. True or false? Getting ready to end it. Come on, guys. Answer that. It's not that hard. Ending it. True. It needs to be in writing. Your tenant homebuyer selection needs to be supported by policy. True or false? Couple more. Getting ready to end it. Why? Because I'm worried about making you guys late again. Can't ruin my perfect record. Okay, I'm going to end this one. And that is true also. Okay. Your tenant and homebuyer selection needs to be adopted by the governing body. True or false? And the answer is, I'm going to end the poll. It is true. Your governing body has to adopt all of your policy, and you have to have proof of adoption. Okay. That is very, very important. You should have a depository of your policies with date of adoption, proof of adoption, have the meeting minutes right behind them. Have that depository in an area where you're allowed just to make copies of it, where it doesn't go anywhere, and all because your policies are supposed to be open to the public. You can give away as many as you want. You just never take them out of that. And in that depository, you should have proof of adoption for every policy, because HUD will say, show me where they adopted that policy. So conflict of interest in admissions. So it's when someone in a position of trust has a competing professional and personal interest. When someone makes a decision in an official capacity and they stand to profit personally. Or when your interests have the potential to conflict with the best interest of the organization or those you represent. So the conflict of interest requirements, you are to report a potential conflict of interest to ONAP, the Office of Native American Programs. You disclose it to the public, the nature of the assistance to be provided to the individual, the specific basis for which there is no conflict. So it's to ensure fair and equitable treatment for all. You determine if that conflict exists, you disclose it to the public, you report it to HUD prior to providing assistance. HUD can make an exception. If the family is low income and they qualified, this is not a conflict, but disclosure is required. If conflict is apparent or perceived, you make the disclosure and you inform HUD. There's several ways to make a public disclosure. One such way is to make the information available in the same manner that you would provide any other public information, your APR, which is required to be posted and available to the public. We often will have an area where your tenants can come in and see it. Oftentimes from the cashier back, you can't get back further than that. So you want it on the side where the tenants have access to it, a great big bulletin board of some sort, you would put it there. Okay. Some programs include a public disclosure section in their monthly meeting agendas. HUD has to be provided with a copy of the disclosure. If the recipient is a TDHE, the disclosure may be provided to the tribe as well. So the requirements regarding conflict of interest are found under 2 CFR 318. Okay, so that book of 200. Those conflict of interest have to do with procurement, finance, things like that. Contracting. It governs the procurement of supplies, equipment, other property, construction, services by the recipients and subrecipients. When it gets to admissions, it is governed by 24 CFR 1000, 30, 32, 34, and 36. And there is program guidance, which is in your reference material, goes back to 2002. Okay, so 22-year-old guidance. But that is the applicable guidance to the conflict of interest in admissions. So under 1030, the applicability in the procurement of supplies, equipment, property, construction services, recipients, and subrecipients, the conflict of interest provisions of 2 CFR 318 shall apply. In cases not governed by 318, the following provisions shall apply. Under 1030, conflicts prohibited. No person who participates in the decision-making process who gains inside information with regard to NAHASDA-assisted activities may obtain a personal or financial interest or benefit from such activities, except for the use of NAHASDA funds to pay salaries or other related administrative costs. Such persons include anyone with an interest in any contract, subcontract, or agreement or proceeds thereunder, either for themselves or others with whom they have business or immediate family ties. Immediate family ties are determined by the Indian tribe or TDHE in its operating policies. I would suggest you find the definition of immediate family. It needs to be listed with the conflict of interest policy in your A&O policy. And if it has first cousin in there, take it out. It's too hard to track first cousins. I argued this when this was written. Okay, so the conflict of interest provision does not apply in instances where a person who might otherwise be included under the conflict provision is low income and selected for assistance in accordance with the recipient's written policies for eligibility. Admission and occupancy of families for housing assisted with your Indian Housing Block Grant funds, provided that there is no conflict of interest under applicable tribal or state law. The recipient must make public disclosure of the nature of the assistance to be provided and the specific basis for the selection of the person. The recipient shall provide the appropriate area ONAP office with a copy of the disclosure before the assistance is provided to the person. Can exceptions be made? Yes, HUD may make exceptions to the conflict of interest provisions set forth at 1030 on a case-by-case basis when it determines that an exception would further the primary objective of NAHASDA and the effective and effective implementation of the recipient's program, activity, or project. A public disclosure of the conflict of interest must be made. A determination that the exception would not violate tribal laws on conflict of interest or any applicable state law may also be made. In determining whether to make an exception to the conflict of interest provisions, HUD must consider whether undue hardship will result either to the recipient or the person affected when weighed against the public interest served by avoiding that prohibited conflict. A recipient must maintain all such records for a period of at least 3 years after an exception is made. Now, I disagree with this also. HUD may not make it to your premises for 5, 6, 7 years. I do not want to see one of you in the circumstance where you say, well, yeah, I posted it. I kept it for 3 years and I threw it away, but I did do it. It's easier if you, like I said, you have to show proof that they're eligible at the time of admission, and you keep that forever in that file. Keep this other 2 or 3 pieces of paper right in there forever, and then you're covered, okay? So this is the guidance 2002-13. It is also, like I said, in your reference materials. Goes back to 2001. And I'm so old and have been around so long that I was at the table in Washington when this was discussed. Okay. They came in and they told us, well, we're going to go out and we're going to see how NAHASDA is doing. So the Office of Inspector General went out and randomly picked housing authorities throughout the United States. The sixth finding was the audit. Among the housing entities reviewed, there were undisclosed conflicts of interest and preferential treatment in the admission to our housing programs. Over half of the housing entities audited had no process to assure adherence to the conflict of interest requirements, or that admissions were made to eligible families and that all the members of the tribes were treated fairly. The conflict of interest provisions apply to anybody who participates in your decision-making process, who could gain inside information with regard to your assisted activities. Such individuals would be, but are not necessarily limited to, all of your housing staff, your housing board of commissioners, and your tribal council, members of their immediate families, and such individuals' business associates. It's a pretty wide net. The requirements prohibit any such individual from benefiting from their position personally, financially, through the receipt of special benefits other than the payment of salary and or appropriate administrative expenses, It doesn't prevent your housing staff, your board members, your tribal council, their family members, business associates from receiving benefits for which they qualify if they're a low-income individual. You can see some exceptions, okay? So you need to find your method. Your applications should ask, do any member of your household have a family or business relationship with an employee of your housing entity, with your board of commissioners, if you have one, or with the tribal council, your entities? Okay. You should have a disclosure of a conflict of interest a disclosure and a conflict of interest statement within every application package for every program that you offer. Applicant's name of the program that they're applying for, their application date, a checkbox. And I'm late again, but I'm happy. So I'm applying for whatever your housing entity you're from. Program noted above, I'm disclosing that I am either an employee, a board of commissioner, or a tribal council member, or I am an immediate family member of your housing entities, employees, board of commissioners, or a tribal council, business partner of employees, board of commissioners, tribal council, or I am neither to all of the above. If you are a family member or a business partner of your housing entities, staff, board of commissioners, or tribal, please state the council, please state the name and your relationship to them. And then there's an acknowledgement statement. I understand that a public disclosure of my selection will be made, that a copy of this disclosure shall be submitted to HUD. I have been notified of my opportunity to receive a copy of the conflict of interest policy. That's why you guys got to have one. You'll get a finding if you don't. Policy, and to receive additional information from the housing entity. I understand that this disclosure does not disqualify and or determine my application ineligible. Okay. I'd love to see any of you guys. Do you do that, please? Thank you, Lindell. In order to effectively comply with the conflict of interest requirements, recipients should have in place a set of procedures for determining when that conflict of interest exists, for reporting that conflict to HUD, disclosing it to the public as required by the regulations. The procedure should include a method of determining whether or not there is a potential conflict of interest with an applicant. Does your housing application ask them to disclose any personal, family, or business relationship with your housing entity's decision makers? Does the housing entity maintain a list of persons having immediate family or business ties to their decision makers? This was another area that I argued. I said that is a step that I will not put in my policy. That's too much work on my staff. It's always changing. Okay. It would never be right. An administrative step for reporting a potential conflict of interest to the area Office of Native American Programs, disclosing to the public the conflict of interest and the nature of the assistance to be provided to the individual and the specific basis for which that selection of the individual was made. So create a procedure for determination of conflict of interest in your admissions, okay? You know that the exceptions could be made. We ran through those. Before any exception can be granted, that public disclosure of the conflict has to be made. A determination that that exception would not violate tribal or applicable state laws on conflict of interest. All records of relating to the exceptions must be maintained for at least 3 years after the exception has been granted. So, low-income individuals to whom the conflict of interest provisions would normally apply, housing staff, board members, tribal council, but who qualify for assistance under your written policies for eligibility, admission, and occupancy, don't fall under the category of an exception. ONAP approval is not required to provide them with the assistance for which they qualify. Read more about it at 1030. However, you must make a public disclosure of the nature of the assistance to be provided The specific basis for the selection of the person. The recipient must also provide the ONAP with a copy of the disclosure before the assistance is provided to the person. So as soon as you get to the step where they've accepted that house, you start that clock. You get that done, okay? That's a sample disclosure fund. It goes up for 7 full days. Don't take it down before the 7 days has elapsed. Make sure that you mark who put it up, what time it went up, what time it came down, and who took it down. I would put a stack of envelopes addressed to your board of commissioners or your tribal council with a stamp on them, with a little hole that you could put through one of those cup hooks, because I've never seen anybody fill it out. They might once, but that way it's done. You just put it up with the notice, take them back down. Please be advised, all public comments must be postmarked within 7 calendar days of the initial date of the posting, as indicated below. All conflict of interest comments must be in a sealed envelope addressed to whatever your housing entity's name is with the address. Conflict of interest comments that are received will be reviewed the next regularly scheduled board meeting. The board will not consider any comments received after the end of the comment period, which is 7 days and 5 minutes past the time you put that notice up, okay? And then you have those signatures on there. Notice was posted at December 5th at 8:06 in the office lobby. It was taken down on the 12th at 8:06 by the Jane Doe, the best office staff ever. So this is the one that you'll see inside the policy, except it's a PDF and you're going to have to change it because it's dated all the way back to 2002. You're going to have to bring it over into the 2024. Specific basis for the selection, they're American Indian, they're low income as determined by HUD. It's going to be their primary residence, and I always put, and they were next on the list. That was the reason for the selection. So you can inform HUD to the Office of Native American Programs. It's regarding the following applicant. She was the vice chairman's sister. She was an immediate family member of a tribal council member. It's being disclosed due to the housing assistance being provided to an immediate family member of the housing, vice chair. We provided them. They're going to be provided assistance with rental assistance. They were selected for, and this is not up on your public notice. This is your letter to HUD. Okay, so you can tell them as much as you want to. We selected them for this unit. They were American Indian. They were low income. It's going to be their primary residence, and they met all criteria and they were next on the list. All recipients should be sure you have a written and adopted policy required by NAHASDA. Your eligibility, your selection, your admission, your occupancies, rent charge, maintenance, and management. Policies must be in accordance with your NAHASDA and program regulations and enforced by a set of procedures that ensure the policies are being adhered to on both in both the actions of the staff and the decisions of the board. Okay. Should be reviewed to ensure they do not contain provisions that inherently allow conflicts of interest. If your housing entity does not have necessary policy systems and control procedures to comply with the NAHASDA requirements, they should be written and adopted immediately. All policies should be made public. Copies should be made available to the public upon request. If the person receiving assistance is low income, they qualify for eligibility, admission, and occupancy, only public disclosure and HUD notification is required. You can read more about that at 1030. However, as stated below, HUD approval for an exception is required when there is a potential conflict of interest that would be in violation of 1030. An example of a situation requiring HUD approval for an exemption to the conflict of interest provision would be housing assistance to a board member whose income is between 80 and 100%. Okay, even if you have that 10% because they're a board member, is why you're going to let them know. Your recipient's compliance with conflict of interest requirement should be included in the tribe and or TDHE's self-monitoring. HUD will also review conflict of interest policies, procedures, and performance during its regular monitoring of a recipient compliance with program requirements. So what is HUD going to check? If there is proof that the family was selected in accordance with your written policies and procedures and their position on the waiting list. If there is a conflict of interest involving a family at admission, if so, has HUD been notified? If so, has that public disclosure been made as required? But in another way, this is a way to save, your ED. It's a way to save your housing authority from tribal council or housing board saying, you need to put my sister-in-law in there. I don't care where she's on the list. You're able to say, well, if you want to put that in writing, I can do that. But you also need to know that I'm going to post it so the public can see it, and I have to notify HUD. And that will usually make them rethink, perhaps that decision. So I'm late again, but not as late as I've been. We're 7 minutes over. Thank you very, very much. Any questions, guys? See you tomorrow for our last and final day. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much, Cheryl. I'm just going to go ahead and do my closing while everyone is typing up there. If there are any questions, by all means, please put them in the chat. I went ahead and launched the feedback survey. This helps out Cheryl a great bit. It just lets her know what you thought of her presentation, which we all know was absolutely incredible.
But so she's late. There's just too much information, guys, to get it in that much time, and I apologize.
No, it is an awful lot of information, and you've done an absolute amazing job of fitting it into the amount of time. It's incredible. It's a lot of information. So thank you very much, Cheryl. We do appreciate it. Don't forget that you can listen to all of her other recordings on our website at www.nativelearningcenter.com. Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3 are already posted. Part 4 will be posted tomorrow morning. If you have any questions on how to get the links yourself, please go ahead and email us, and we'd be more than happy to send them directly to you. Don't forget to check out our upcoming events on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You can also listen to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Simplecast. Thank you all very much for joining us today. We greatly appreciate it. And once again, thank you very much, Cheryl. You are amazing as always. And we can't wait to see you again tomorrow.
Thanks, guys. Everybody have a great night.